Bryan Vogel.
So hello, I am Bryan, and what you're seeing here is actually all in Principle. So I decided I would take a note from Sean's book when he did his sketch workshop and design my entire little presentation at the beginning in Principle, so you guys can see that it's a pretty versatile product. I'm not just using it to animate like phone UIs and web UIs. You can really do almost anything in it. So before we get started, I know you guys have already met amongst yourselves, but I was too concerned with switching out the microphone and the door being open. So if we could go around and have everybody at least just say your name so I can try and get familiar with you, and then not maybe what where you work, but like what you're interested in, what field you're in, and if you want just anything you're trying to get out of it. I know a few of you replied to the survey, so this is going to be a pretty grounds up kind of workshop, and we'll do a lot of hands-on stuff in both sessions. So if you don't mind starting, we'll go around the room over here.
My name is David. I'm a backend developer, management solutions, working in Nationwide right now. I have tried to first myself. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Hello, my name is David. I am a developer at Manifest Solutions. It's a contracting company, and I'm working at Nationwide right now. I'm a backend developer, so I'd like to diversify myself by kind of seeing some more front-end stuff and getting into design. Oh my gosh, this is not even on.
Is it on? Okay.
Hi, I'm Nafisa, and I'm a CIS student at OSU. Mostly focused on like backend stuff, so again, I mostly want to see more of the front end stuff because we don't do any of that at OSU. It's mostly backend and Java.
I'm Ben Papalardo. I actually work here at Cardinal Solutions as a UX designer, and I'm just really into animation. So I've been learning how to animate SVGs, and I've been interested in learning Principle, so that's why I'm here.
I've really made this complicated. I'm Adam O'Reilly. I'm a student at Ohio State in New Media and Communication Technology, and I'm minoring in design. And I'm interested in front-end development and UI design.
I'm Mike Adams, and I work at a Nationwide subsidiary, and I do front-end development, and I am really interested in animation and just prototyping for mobile.
Hi, I'm Shannon Beckwith. I'm a senior UX designer at Safelight. I'm more interested in learning more prototyping. I've done a little bit of prototyping before, and just learning a new one that seems closely related to Sketch.
It's been off, but no updates yet, so I can still.
So when the light's on, does that mean it's muted or it's
Yeah, when the red light's on, when you push it, it means green. If you push the green button, it means it's on.
I'm Matt Sloan. I'm a UI developer mainly. I started in design. I do a lot of our prototyping for our global initiatives at the company I'm at, but I do them all in the browser using Node and Angular, so looking for maybe something a little faster here in Principle.
Hi, I'm Megan Harval. I work at Bonfire Red. I'm a digital designer in general and looking for a new prototyping tool. Hope it's Principle.
Cool. So I am Bryan, as I said earlier. I work at Nationwide subsidiary with Mike here. I also tend to do a little too much freelance work, and it all focuses on animation. I'm probably in the same group as a lot of you, where I saw Toy Story and it blew my mind, and I didn't realize that was actually something you could do. So I went to school for engineering, got into the AutoCAD stuff, and then realized I'd rather be designing things for animation. So my full-time gig, we do a lot of like print design and visual design, but this is just a lot of really cool, fun stuff that hopefully you guys will have good takeaways from. I know in the responses and just going around, we have a lot of developer, like back-end developer or front-end developer. So this should be easy enough for everybody to pick up. That's one of the things I love about it, that you can just kind of jump in. It's a pretty basic interface, but get going here. So this is something I've designed, and I've been able to redesign it other than the text at the bottom using Principle. It was originally from After Effects. So just to show that it's pretty powerful, the only thing I can't do is the scripting. So all the other animation you see, I was able to rebuild using this $100 tool from a single developer, which is pretty awesome. Just so you guys have a little bit more of an understanding of the things I usually use Principle for, or something I've done recently. I put the most recent project I've done in here, which is a promo video for an app being built by a gentleman at Rev 1 Ventures. So I just did the app promo video, which I tend to do a lot of. And all the shots that you see of the app within this video, I did in Principle and then imported into After Effects. Because Principle is just that much faster that it makes a lot more sense to prototype. So we'll see if there's... So, yeah, it's very exciting, right? So this actually, I just took snippets of the actual app from the full prototype. So this is one of the best things about Principle is there we saw little bits. Let me dismiss Kevin's alert. But let me find it here. So like the little watch interface, I have 3 screens, right? For the full interface, it goes all, and this is an actual like interactive prototype you could have on your phone, so he was able to touch it, the client was, and get feedback, play with it, send it to other people, have them play with it on their phone or their computer. So it's really cool in the fact that you can get like very high fidelity, touchable prototypes, and then I can take all of this work that we've done building out this app UI, toss it into a promo video so you can sell it. And this is all before any code has happened, right? So you can validate your product, have it be touchable. This one was crazy because every single button was touchable. So there's no false path in the app, right? Anything that you think you could do, you could do. So it's just easy enough in Principle that we were able to put that together, figure out what we wanted to show in the video, and pull it out from there. And we'll actually come back to this when we get into drivers next week. So first things first, does everybody have Principle on their computers today? Okay. One of the really cool things is that they do only the time you've used. So even if you have the trial, it's really nice, and I'm sure by the end of today we'll all be buying it. If you are a student, you get a 50% discount. So make sure you take advantage of that. I actually emailed him to see, it's a single developer, to see if they have any swag, but he's just kind of, grounds up, doing it from, they don't have anything. So we could also probably make some swag for him, huh? So coming into this week, I do want to cover some animation basics. In the feedback I got, I was seeing that there's a lot of developers, and I'm not sure with designers too, how much animation background we get. We'll be covering just 4 things that I think are important to know when animating within Principle. If you really want to know about animation, look up the 12 Principles of Animation. It's by by a couple of really well-renowned Disney animators, and that'll teach you a lot about just the feel and emotion. We'll go through a few of these, not exact topics, this week. We'll talk about what's so great about Principal. As many of you know, there's a lot of prototyping apps available. Envision seems to be just leading the pack because they're buying most of the pack up as they go. And then there's tools like Flinto that are very similar to Principal. There's tools like Framer, which can use a bit of code, but it's not always potentially usable when you go to actually write the code for something. So it really depends on your comfort and your familiarity with it. We'll do a quick tour of the app. If you've all downloaded it and opened it, you probably see it's a pretty basic interface. If you've ever used Sketch, it probably looks really familiar. We'll then go through these 3 activities. So anything on these that I have with an asterisk are going to be activities where we'll get started. I'll show you guys some of the basic things that we're going to be learning, and then we'll kind of do some hands-on time, walk around. You guys can just play around, experiment. And then just so you're prepared for next week, here's what we'll be covering. We'll have a quick recap of what we went over this week and things we learned, how to use the app, and any questions you have from a week's worth of hopefully playing around with it pretty hard. We'll go through importing hi-fi components. So importing from Sketch is a big thing, as well as just importing audio and video. Just came out like 2 weeks ago, not even, like a week and a half ago. So it's been incredibly awesome to be able to actually put audio and video in your prototypes, just like Flinto does. And then drivers, which are a huge part of what Principal is. You can do a lot with Principal, but the drivers really take it to that next level and put it really close to what you would be able to do in After Effects. So it's very cool. And the last thing we'll do next week is a web group prototype, and we'll do a show and tell at the end of next week's class. So we'll get through drivers fairly quickly, and then I'll give you guys some assets that you can import or use or do whatever you like, and we'll all build a prototype of either a website, a mobile app, tablet, a watch app about the Columbus Web Group, and then we can all show each other. It's always cool to see how each other's minds works and where we go with it. So that's what we'll be doing next week. Sound good? Yeah. Stunned silence. Yeah. Like, this is gonna be so cool. It just takes a while to load. This is in Principal. I'm just kidding. This is a joke. This is me trying to be funny. So this is just, since I designed this whole thing in Principal, this is just auto looping right now. So it's just cool. I was building this out and I was like, how do I want this circle to disappear? And then I'm like, I'll do some dots. So this whole thing, it takes like maybe 60 seconds and you get a load animation, which is pretty much unheard of with other prototyping tools. All right, so let's move into some animation foundation. So the first thing that we can really excel in using a tool like Principal that you wouldn't be able to in something like InVision prior to their new beta, or like a tool like Marvel, or just seeing a flow in slides, is conveying emotion. And this is one of my favorite examples is, just the shake off. It's just telling you, hey, no, you didn't get it quite right, but it's not being rude. It's just saying, it's almost like saying, try again, There's a lot of great examples of emotion. You have the card swipe animations that we see a lot of these days, where it tells you, yes or no. Sometimes they give you a heart. Sometimes they give you an X or a smile. So there's a lot of easy ways you can put little bits of emotion just with these nice easings and with nice graphics. The next one is directing attention. So this is a big part of what animation can do. If you're just going through, a flow of a UI, slide by slide by slide, people are going to look at the whole screen, but it's hard to know in a static image where to look or what's supposed to be the point. So this is the best one I've ever seen, which is just, exactly what you need to do here. It's telling you everything, which is a flashing bar. So this is showing us that animation doesn't need to be a bunch of spring animations and all this crazy stuff happening and everything gets animated into every screen. It's just a blinking bar, and everybody in this room probably knows what that means and what to do. So it's just giving some direction and letting you know where to start on this page. One of the biggest things is to show a function. So again, it's easy to put a lot of animations in, and here we actually have quite a few in this example. But this is a material design example, and we see they have that same dot in the same corner, but its function changes, and it tells you what it's doing. And the biggest one for me is the surprise and delight. Whenever I work with somebody doing animation, the biggest thing is we're trying to delight your customers. We're trying to show them something new, something unexpected, to get out of the rigidity of just seeing these slides. We want them to be entertained by playing with this. You want to see some life come into them and excitement when they're touching it or when they're seeing it. So I thought this one was really cool. It's a drag and their loading thing, because it's like a food app, is a little boiling pot, right? So that's one of those like hidden little treasures that's exciting, where you'd be going through, you'd be like, okay, this looks pretty good. You'd pull it down, you'd be like, oh, this is really neat. I got really excited last year when I filed my taxes because TurboTax had really nice SVG animations as it was sending. And that's usually like, okay, it's taking 60 seconds to send, but instead they took me through the story of where my taxes were in the internet, So I didn't mind it because they changed it and they delighted me, right? So it's cool. Any questions on any of these? We'll get into them a lot more once we get into the tool and you can see kind of the power that it has. Okay, so these are, I was trying to think of the main reasons why I like Principal and why anybody who uses other prototyping tools would be excited to use it. The first one is that layers auto-link. So one of the big downfalls of other tools like Pixate or Flinto is that you have to link all your layers together. Even in a tool like InVision, you still have to okay, these belong together. I want this to transfer here. So basically what this means is if you have two layers that are named the same on two different artboards, they will know that they're the same layer. So I could have a circle in one artboard and a square on another artboard and name them, object 1, and as long as they have the same name, it's going to auto-animate that circle into that square on the next one. And I don't have to do anything. So this is one of the big things in Sketch is naming your layers appropriately. So it's really easy to get into it and start diving in. And even in the demos I was putting together, I was just like, okay, let me create another object here. Let me put another rectangle in here. So it's named really horribly. Thankfully, they numbered them all because rectangle 1 on this screen and rectangle 1 on this screen will then change shape, which is one of the biggest tenets of Principal. So basically, you could create two screens and it animates for you. So you don't have to change anything, as long as you're okay with the default animation. As soon as you import from Sketch or your files from Photoshop, if you've exported them and you put it in Principal, if they're named correctly, it's already animated. All you have to do is tweak it, right? So that's why it's so quick. When I'm talking about state changes, that's the circle going into the square. So you can have objects that are dissimilar, and as long as Principal understands what they are, it'll automatically animate between those. We can quickly manipulate perception, which we'll get into at the end of today, which is our animate timeline, where we can change from our default easing, which in Principal is a nice ease in and ease out at 0.3 seconds, because that's the Mac OS standard and the iOS standard. So they by default give you what iOS uses and what Mac uses, since this is primarily a Mac tool, as you all have Macs and know. So they try to set you up for success already, but we can quickly manipulate that so that things can fade in differently and kind of give the secondary animation or the hint animations as needed without having to make multiple screens. We can manipulate them like you would in After Effects on a single artboard. So drivers are really cool, and since we don't have a lot of familiarity with Principal in here, I thought I'd give you guys a quick example of what drivers can do. So they're pretty slick. We'll come back over to Power Sage here. we all see the on the right. So in PowerSage, this is the registration screens, right? So this is done before the audio and video. We're able to be a part of this. So here I have a blue screen because I fixed it in After Effects. But these days we can put a video in there, which is really cool. So we're coming along, and I have all of these buttons here as drivers. So that way it knows, hey, if I'm pushing it, the push command will slide it to the right and fill in the back with green. The best one here is this guy. So we have this slider to pick if we want our energy app to show us, I want to be more comfortable, keep my air running, my heating and cooling system running, or hey, I'd really like to save some money. So I'm able to click and drag, and you see I have it affecting other things within it. We have this green line that's showing up behind it. We have these other money bags that are coming out because, hey, I'm saving a lot. So this is one of those things where we're able to touch it right in this one screen. So this is just, you can put this on the phone, drag it back and forth to your heart's desire. And then when we hit accept, we see that everything goes up nicely and nothing moves back to its original position because we're able to have those pieces of data be manipulated within Principle rather than even having to do any code or any fake stuff there. So that's one of those things where when I said this app, you could fully touch it, you could drag that back and forth, and you can't have it input data saying, oh, they chose this comfort level, but you can get pretty darn close without doing anything else. So variable sizing, you'll see that I'm giving you a presentation in Principle right now, which is not iPhone size, it's not Apple Watch size. This is just a random size I picked and thought might fit on the projector. So you can do, they have dribble standards by default because a lot of people like to post a dribble, and honestly, I think that's their marketing ploy, get a lot of people posting things they did in Principle on dribble, and more people will like it. That's how I found out about it, so it worked. And then the big thing is the communities. So there's a bunch of them. PrincipleShortcuts.com actually has all of the other ones that I use linked on the bottom of their page. So that's why I figured I'd throw this one up there. It's kind of a catch-all. The two big things that I use is if you're on Facebook, Principle has an awesome Facebook group where people are always posting their work and they're asking questions and putting their PRD files up, which is the file type that Principle makes. So it's really neat. Principle Shortcuts has all the keyboard shortcuts listed out, which is also in the documentation at principleformac.com. The other big thing is principlerepo.com, which is linked to on Principle Shortcuts. And what this is just a bunch of downloadable examples of cool things people have done in Principle. So a lot of times people will do like little micro interactions or little single page things. And it's really neat to see what other people are doing. All right, so this is going to be our first activity, but before we get into that, I'm going to switch back over to Principle. We'll take a quick tour, and then we'll get into activity 1, and then probably take a quick bathroom break. So if you all have Principle open, or you can just follow along on the screen, we'll go through a bit of what we have here. So if you've ever used Sketch, this probably looks like Sketch's little brother. So we have this big area here that's like the darker gray behind our single artboard, which is the canvas. It's where you edit everything and everything takes place. On top of that, highlighted in green, we have a single artboard. Some notes about the artboards. Whichever one you're working on has that green ring around it. They're by default always going to be spaced this far apart. The fun fact is that if we take something off of the artboard but keep it in this green layer, they auto distance themselves as soon as you select another layer. So there'll be some points where you want something off the screen, then to come into the screen, so it's a nice glide in animation. So sometimes you'll be doing that and things will overlap. As soon as you click off, it'll auto reset. So you don't have to worry about your artboards. They'll take care of themselves, which to some people I think can be a nuisance. To me, I love it because it's one less thing I have to click and drag around the screen. So over here, like you saw in the Power Stage app, is the preview window. So one really cool thing about the preview window is that you can click and drag and test out your prototype as you're building it, right? Sometimes it gets annoying. This is called picture-in-picture. So you can actually have it do a side-by-side. You can click and drag it off the screen. You can have it on a different screen completely. I know if you're doing a website or like a tablet, sometimes you need it a little bigger. And what you can do here, this is actually just a Mac OS shortcut, is Command and your tilde button, and it rotates between the two. So it just rotates between your screens that are open. So say you had one principal window and your preview window, you could Command tilde as a shortcut between those rather than having to get back to the other one all the time. So it's really nice. One of the things we've already done here is in the top left, which is a rectangle. So this is Principal's really only tool to draw on your artboard, is this single gray rectangle, right? 44 by 44 rectangle in the top left, and that's what you have to work with. So it seems really basic until we realize that we can stretch it out, we can make it a square, we can make it a rectangle. You're able to change the radius, make circles. There's a lot of stuff you can do with that simple rectangle, and for all of our activities today, we'll actually just be using the rectangle from within Principal. So that's pretty cool. Next to it, we have text. I should say for the rectangle, the shortcut is R to use it. For the text, it's T. Text works just like you would think it would. You get a block of text. You can change the font. You can change the size. The one thing you can't change with text is the line spacing, which is, I think, the big thing we're missing is the line spacing so far. But you can do it however you want. You can change the color. And this is nice because then it's within Sketch and it's a scalable property. So anything you design within Principal, anything within Principal, then you can scale easily. So when we import files, we'll import them at a high res so that we can use them. But anything within Principal is automatically scalable. As you saw earlier, I clicked up here for a new artboard. A is also for artboard. So it's pretty basic shortcuts, kind of nice that they link in. And the artboards will always be at the same size. So one thing we should know about artboards is that whatever size you have for what you're working on is the size. You can't have multiple sizes in the same project. So you'll want to make sure you have the size you need for the biggest screen and work down from there. Going along the top, and Animate. We'll get into Animate today. We'll get into drivers next week. What these do is they bring the top and the bottom, respectively, and allow us to really change that time, that feeling, and that perception of your designs. So the next one over, we'll also dive into first thing next week, which is our import button. And for those of you familiar, you see it has a little sketch gem on it there. And what this does is if you have a sketch file open, it will allow you to import from the page you're on. So whatever is visible within Sketch, it'll ask you if you want to import that and at what resolution. Because again, if you're importing from another tool, it's going to be rasterized. So it'll say, do you want to import 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, and do all that work for you rather than having to export them all. Next, we have group and ungroup, which can be done with Command G and Command Shift G, just like most other tools you've probably worked with. And beyond that, we have forward and backward, which is our layers. So within a layer, here we have text in this rectangle, so I can send the text back behind the rectangle so that the rectangle is on top. This is the same command as most other tools as well. It's Command and bracket left or right. I believe if you do Command Shift bracket, it's send to front and send to back. But we'll learn these as we get into. So up here in the top left, let me close these panels. We have our align tools, which are super helpful. So here I can center align my text quickly. If I was going to make this rectangle into a button at the bottom, we can put it to the bottom, put it to the left, and then from there we can resize it either by clicking and dragging it, or we can use these up here. They have the click and drag functionality. You can tab up one at a time, or you can even do simple math equations right within the inspector. So it knows one at a time division, multiplication, subtraction, addition, which is really helpful if you want to do, if we take this rectangle and we wanted to make 3 buttons across the bottom, I can just divide it by 3. We'll put it to a height of 20. And then from there, I can just duplicate it easily and align it as I see fit. So it makes it quick to edit, just like you would within Sketch.
Brian, when you're showing those, can you zoom in on those?
Well, on these,
Yeah, through OSS.
I don't have that set up. Yeah. Yeah. Can just make the screen huge. All right, so getting into layers. As you can see, we have 3 artboards here already. It works just like Sketch would, where you can rename your artboards with a Command R or a double tap, and everything is nested within that artboard. We can actually click and drag on top to create children of layers. So if you want one layer to clip another or to be in control of another layer, you can parent and make a child. Or we can select these 2, Command G or the group button at the top, and make a group. And groups are actually a big part of what we're doing within Principal, which we'll get into shortly in the first activity. So the only other thing we have, the best part of this whole application. So when we're on an artboard, there's a tiny little lightning bolt here, and we can actually see it based on any part of a layer. So if I come into artboard 2 where I have this text and this rectangle, whenever I select one of these, it has that little lightning bolt off to the right. So when you select a layer, you get this whole panel, which will be very tiny on the screen for Kevin, of events. So this is one of the best parts of the entire application. So these allow us to create transitions. Principal calls them events, but they're like transition animations for each component. So here, I'm taking this whole artboard. So I'm saying anything I do on this artboard that fits within these categories. So it's saying if I tap on this artboard, if I do a long press, then what? So one of the cool things here is you select, okay, if I tap on this artboard, and then I want it to go to this one, or I can drag it over here. Sometimes you want it so that when you tap on this artboard, it comes back to the one you're on. And what this does is creates a duplicate artboard. So if you have an event and you drag it to the artboard you're on, it'll duplicate the artboard. So it's a quick way to duplicate if you're just trying to create a small transition. So within these, we have tap, which works exactly as you think it would. It's any pressure on your prototype. We have long press, which you can harken it back to like 3D touch. If you have a newer iPhone, there's some Snapchat features where you press and hold, or like the voice memos that you can do and send quick voice chats. Those are all kind of an example of a long press where it's not immediately going to say, okay, they tapped it. You have to hold it for about a second, and then it'll say, okay, they've held it long enough. Let's make the transition occur now. Next, we come down to our scroll features. We have scroll begin, scroll release, and scroll end. So these are really neat for if you've ever scrolled in an app and the menu bar up top as you scroll up has kind of changed its size to become a little smaller. We can do features like that, or when we begin scrolling, it transitions us to the next screen where we've adjusted some things. So you have a greater view. You can really use it for anything you can potentially think of. With the scroll, we'll work on, in a moment, paging and scrolling. So paging is left to right, and scrolling is top to bottom. Scrolling transitions actually work for paging as well. So you can have something going left to right and put a scrolling transition on it. The difference between a scroll release and a scroll end. So a scroll release transitions as soon as the pressure or the control comes off of your prototype. So say you're scrolling up and you let go, and that menu bar was smaller because you were scrolling. As soon as you release, it's going to pop back out. Whereas a scroll end will wait until that motion of that scroll is going to dissipate, and as soon as that motion stops, your menu would come back. So it's two very different types. Scroll end tends to work best. There are some use cases for scroll release, but it really depends on what you're trying to make. And typically I've used scroll release when I'm trying to hack something to look a certain way. So that's cool. Drag begin and drag end are that slider I was showing you guys earlier. That's a draggable component, so you can have transitions happen when you're dragging it and the end of dragging it, since they don't have their own kinetic power. So touch up and touch down, these are as soon as you've put pressure on and as soon as you take pressure away from something. What they're really good for is imitating buttons that have like a shadow or press. Some of the Apple Watch UI has the dismiss alerts where you'll press and hold, really just for creating an extra bit of realism. I find that I use them the most with buttons. Is you're pushing down on it, so you want it to look indented, or you want it to have a different color, maybe, and highlight itself. And then as soon as you let go, you want it to go back to the original state. The bottom three, hover inside and hover outside, are for a lot of times I'll use them to fake something when I'm recording a prototype. When you hover on it, it'll do its transition to whatever state. When you hover outside, same thing. So it depends on where your cursor is over your preview window. So if it's on or off. And the final one is one of the biggest ones, which is auto. So auto is just an auto transition, right? So we're saying, okay, so when we get to this artboard, I want it to automatically come over to this one. So here we have a tap and then an auto. So I'm saying if I tap on this, it goes to the second artboard and then automatically goes to the third. So we'll see when I tap, it goes to white because it's going to that third blank artboard. A good example of this is in this little watch UI that I made. I have it as a hover inside because I wanted it to only trigger when I was recording it for when I hovered over the watch. And then it goes automatically from the second artboard to the third one, where you can see there's a couple of state changes that happen with my layers. And then I have a hover outside so I could reset it in case I didn't get it quite right the first time. So when we hover inside, it goes to 2, and then you can see the green actually moves through, like almost frame by frame, through the artboards. So when I hover back outside, it goes to 1, you can see it go to 2, and then see it transition automatically to 3. So auto is a really great feature for like guiding somebody through multiple states of an app without them knowing that they're interacting with it. So they don't have to actually input anything manually. Cool. I know there was a lot of upfront detail. We'll get into an activity here. Is everybody all right? Do we want to get into activity 1 and then take a quick break, or you want to take a break and then do the activities? Feeling good? All right. So I'm going to close this one out. If we could all open a new artboard. So if we all have a new one open, what we'll do is we'll do just an iPhone 6 preset. So if you go into your inspector, there's a drop down for size presets. Go ahead and select iPhone 6. And what we're doing here is learning a little bit about paging, scrolling, and dragging. So the activity we'll go through right away will be about paging and scrolling, and then we'll give a little bit of flex time so that you guys can play around with it and see how different things interact and play around with dragging a bit too and just kind of mess everything up. You know, it's the best way to learn. So there's my fun animation for activities. So in our new artboard, let's go ahead and we'll make a new rectangle. So this is just very loose, so we're not going to do any specific sizes. You guys can really design it how you want as long as we have similar components. It doesn't matter what colors you choose, what sizes you choose. When we get to specifics for sizes, I'll make sure to let you know, hey, we need to make sure these layers are locked this way. So for now, what I'm going to do is lock my rectangle here with this little lock so that I can make a circle. So 44 by 44 is fine for me. I'm just going to take the radius way up so it turns into a circle. And then I'm going to use Shift and the arrow keys on this layer to bump it down 20 pixels each way. And then from here, I'm going to take and make another rectangle. And I'll just align it to the left and bump it down 20 pixels. So basically what we're going to do is make like a news feed or like a social feed style here. From this guy, I'm just going to take it and drag it over. Do some simple math to give it 20 pixels from each side. So all I did was I drag it all the way to the right, subtract 20, and the way the principle works is everything always comes to the top left. So I know in some Adobe products you can choose which anchor point you want it to go to. Principle is all top left all the time. Let's give this some more height. Let's say it's 100 pixels deep. From here, I'm just going to click Option to duplicate this and drag it down. So basically what I'm envisioning in my head right now is, you know, this top one might be an image or some sort of media, right? And we'll make this bottom one, we'll say 150, and this will end up being our text layer. So from here, I'm going to take my layer 3. I'm just going to lighten up this gray a little bit so we can see the difference. And before we get too far, I'm going to go through and rename my layers on the left real quick. So you can either double click on the layer name or Command R to rename them. We'll just name this profile. I'll name this media. I'll name this content. All right, so I want to kind of visually call out that the bottom one would be, you know, some sort of text or filler here. So I'm going to take this media layer again. I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to bring it forward so we can see it. And then from here, I'm just going to manipulate it. Let's say we want it to be maybe 15 pixels tall. And I want to take, let's say, 20 pixels off of this. Right? And then we'll use our center align tool to put it in the center. I'm going to select this media 2 layer and shift and the down arrow to bump it down. So basically what we're doing is just fake text filler. So you guys can go ahead and use that same thing, kind of fill up your boxes here. Another way to duplicate a layer is if you have it selected, you can use Command and D to duplicate. The smart thing would have been to rename these initially so it would number them automatically for us. So once we get here and we have our filler content created, we'll want to group a few things together. We'll want to take our content backing and our fake text, and we can use the group button up top, or we can use the Command G to group these, and I'll rename these filler content. And then we want to take our filler content and our media up top, and we'll do the same thing. We'll group these again, and I'll just leave those as filler content plus media. It's named them nicely for us. And then we'll take the whole thing and we'll group that. And I'm just going to name this feed item for now, as though it's a news feed. So now we have is everybody caught up, where we all stand together pretty nicely. So yeah, very basic, just one single news feed item. What we'll do from here is we can either Command D or we can Option click, and we're going to duplicate this. And I'm going to hold Shift to keep them in line with each other. We'll drag it down. So there's a group option up top, or you can use the Command button and the letter G. So yeah, I can open up my group on the left here. So first I grouped the filler content and the content back. Those are all housed together with the our fake media and our fake content, and then they're all together, just so we have a nice bundle. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. What we're going to do is create yet another duplicate of this feed content, and we're going to drag it south of our artboard. So you can really create as many as you like, as long as you get at least one of them off of the artboard on the bottom. We'll be able to use the scrolling features. I'm going to put another one down here. Okay. So everybody caught up and has just multiple pieces of content hanging off the bottom? Okay. So next thing we want to do is make another group. We're going to take all four of these pieces. We can click and drag since they're all in a group to select them all, or we can, select over here using Command or Shift to select all of our layers. We'll put them in another group. What we'll do is I'm going to name this scrolling group. And the strange thing here is we'll want to put this one inside of another group. So now it's renamed itself scrolling group. So you just take your one group and you put it inside of another group. It'll seem kind of silly, but it has a big purpose to it when we get into scrolling. Yeah, and this is pretty much the purpose that it does it for, is for scrolling pieces. All right. Is everybody caught up? Anybody need help getting to this spot? You guys okay? All right. So on our main scrolling, if we have our main scrolling group selected, where we have our 4 feed items grouped in, our scrolling group, and then a top scrolling group, right above that in our inspector, we have clip sublayers, and then above that is horizontal and vertical. And what these mean is the ability to move your content. And right now they're both set to static. So horizontal meaning left and right, vertical meaning up and down. So they all have these options: static, drag, scroll, and page. And if we remember the name of the activity, hey, this fits right in. So what we'll want to do is take our static on the vertical and put it as scrolling. So as soon as I put it into scrolling, we can see that in our preview, I can see that there's more content, but it's not quite coming up. Since I have the main scrolling selected, we can see that my group comes all the way down here to the bottom. When I take this, I can actually control the height of the group. And then I'm able to scroll. So what we want to do is take that main layer on the top, pull that group all the way up to the bottom of the artboard so that it all sits within the artboard. And then in our preview, we'll be able to scroll. So this whole selection around the main group, what it does by default is it hugs all the content that you have. But we don't want it we only want it to show the content that's in the artboard. So as long as we manipulate our group to be viewable just in the artboard, it then allows us to scroll. Is everybody okay with that? It's a big trick here. So now we have some scrolling content. Does everybody have scrolling content?
Mine scrolls anyway without dragging it down. Drag it back up to the artboard.
Interesting. Yeah.
Which group did you make scroll?
The top one.
Yeah. I know mine just does that.
You can't scroll.
Yeah. Sort of.
Oh, I'm just like forcing it to go.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
You were right.
You're right, Matt.
There we go.
Cool. So if we all have scrolling content, if we scroll it all the way to the bottom, one of the things we can see is, oh, hey, our content's just right at the bottom of this page. So that's kind of annoying. So one thing we could do is, maybe we'll just bump our main group layer up, and then, suddenly it's able to show, because sometimes you'll have a bottom menu. This isn't always what we want it to do, so I'm actually going to put that back. This is the reason that we created a group within a group. So if we come back to our secondary group, just under our top one, we see that it has this content selection around all of our content as well, right? So the trick we can do here is we can take it and extend it however far we want past the bottom, and now that registers as content. So as soon as we do that, we come back over into our preview, it no longer sits on the bottom. So that's the only reason we double nested, was so that we could control how it views our scrollable content. You all right, David? You're looking at the screen like something crazy's happening.
I'm sorry, you applied the link to the group to the middle subgroup?
Yeah, so we have our 4 feed items. We're on this first group with our content in it, and then I pulled it down just a little bit so that in the preview window.
You're controlling the scroll on this with the touchpad. I'm only able to do it by clicking and pulling down.
Yeah, I can click and pull. You can see here I can click it and shove it, or I can do a 2-finger swipe too.
Do something to make that happen? That's not working. Oh wait, never mind. Sorry.
It's cool, man. Yeah, so our main group scrolls, and then we have our scrolling group, which controls the height of the content within the scroll, and then we have our content pieces. And of course, all of these different things can be animated with an event. So you already see we have, 5 groups, and each of those groups has, for me, it has another 6, 8, 9 things in it. So there's an insane amount of things that can be animated. We could easily just animate them all for the sake of animating things. But instead, we've put them into this nice scrolling pattern. So yeah, that's how to create a simple scroll. The next thing we're going to do is do paging. So you'd usually do it with like a card interface or like, swipe left or swipe right. since we've just made this beautiful thing, instead we're going to make a swipeable feed that just brings us into more feeds. Doesn't really make sense from a UI standpoint. I get that, but it makes sense from we're learning the program and we're gonna try it out this way.
Brian, can you add that zoom to view?
Yeah. And go way over here and zoom in. All right. So if we remember on this main scrolling group, one of the things we did to get the page to scroll was we brought that group all the way up to the bottom. With paging, we of course want each page to be the same width. So what we're going to do here is take this same group and just bump it out to the sides, and I'm actually going to bump this guy up to the top so that our group size is the same size as the artboard. So we're just going to take and drag them over, they'll snap into place, and we have them the same size here. So we're just going to work within one artboard, which is really cool. We're going to take this top scrolling group, and we're going to want to duplicate it. So again, there's a couple ways we can do this. We can either Command D and drag it over, or we can Option and drag it over, which is the way I'm going to do it. Hold Shift to keep them in line, and we see it kind of pulls itself in there and lines up. So I'm just going to put it right next door. Just to make it fun so that we have more than two things to page to, I'm going to do that same thing over again. I'm going to click Option, hold Shift, drag them over. So now when I zoom back out, we see, oh wow, we have three huge content boxes happening here. So if you can imagine, what we're going to do again is now we have three folders for groups of scrolling. Has everybody gotten this far? We duplicate our content. We're going to select all of these layers, and we're going to put these in a group. So I'm going to rename this to paging. And what we'll do is we'll come to our inspector. Let me zoom in. Whoa. We'll go down and we'll select page. So this is going to be kind of the same issue that we were having before. If I try to page, I can pull over and see the content, but then as soon as I let go, it goes back. If we look at our group size, this is the same tenet as we have with scrolling. We see that our group extends way past our artboard. So in order to see that content, what we'll do is we'll take our group, we'll pull it in so that it snaps into place on the artboard, and then we'll try again. And now you can see it nicely lines up with each page. So the big thing here is that we have three different groups. So Principal will know by group which one to stop on without us having to do anything else. So because all of our groups are the same size as the artboard, it knows where to stop. So you could even do this with things that aren't the same size as the artboard. As long as all your paging assets are the same width, it'll know where to stop. So you could have some things kind of show in the screen left and right, so it gives the illusion of, hey, there's something else to page to over here, which is usually a nice thing to do, a nice little hint. As long as they're the same width as each other, you'll be able to page through them. So now we have scrollable content. We can page over, scroll here, page over, and scroll here. And you'll notice with our duplicated content left and right, the nice thing is that we already set it up to scroll, so it brought that information over. So all three of these are scrollable, and we can drag back and forth. Good? Everybody got there? So this is our really poorly designed UI where we have three news feeds that are pageable, that nobody would know that other content exists, and then our app goes under because nobody was seeing the content that we were creating, right? So, but it animates nicely, so that's what matters. So the only other thing that we haven't gone over is within these two horizontal and vertical options is dragging, right? So what we're going to do to show a little bit of dragging is I'm just going to zoom in so you guys can see, and then I'm going to double click on this circle up here on the top left just to kind of not have to dig into my layers. We're just going to manipulate this this component here. You can do this to any asset you choose. So if you have something in front of you, just pick it. So what we can do from here is it's static both directions. I can choose a horizontal drag. And then if we come into our preview, we can see that, oh, I can drag it left and right, but I can't quite drag it up and down. So this is really cool because we didn't do anything but put this property on here and we're able to move it around. So that means that somebody who's playing with the touchable version of it is able to just say, oh, I think this should be able to move, and oh, look, it does. We can put a vertical drag on it as well. And what that means is now I can move it all over the page, and we can see it's behind that content layer. So we'd probably want to bring it up front, but I can move it to my heart's desire. And then as soon as I go to the next page and come back, it's still there because it remembers that property in the touchable version. So this is a bit different. This kind of property I use a lot to fake like adding files to something or deleting things if you click and drag them down. And you can have those all be actionable. That's when we were talking about the events earlier and the drag begin and the drag release. This is where that comes into play, because as soon as you create a draggable component and as soon as I start moving it, it would trigger an event. So as soon as I could move this, I could have like a little trash can pop up at the bottom if I wanted to, or a plus sign to add it to something. So it's pretty cool. All right, so next activity, more activities. I'm just gonna keep saying activities. Is using events to transition between screens. So this is pretty cool. We're gonna get off of using one artboard and use maybe 3 or 4. We're gonna get wild, So because of our time crunch too, I was gonna have our animation panel be a third activity. But instead we're going to combine these activities. So we'll go through and we'll do a little bit of it, and then we'll just kind of play around and walk around and see how everybody's doing. So let's come back into our big demo here. If you guys want to keep this, I would save it now because we're about to destroy a lot of it. You might want to save it to something else. I am going to duplicate this. I'm going to call it demo 1, 2.
Hey Brian, afterwards can we post these files?
Yeah, if you want to. All right, so for our next one, what we're going to get into is since we created this like little news feed thing, we're going to make kind of like a better app structure than we had here with our poor paging and our bad user experience design. And we're going to create this scrolling feed where we can click on just the top item for now, because we're just going to do one thing so we can get the hang of it, and expand it so we can see more of that item. So I'm going to dig down into my artboard here, dig down into my paging layer, and I'm just going to select these 2 groups of content off to the right that aren't part of the artboard, and we're going to delete them. Yeah. That didn't make sense for our UI, so our company has told us to redesign, right? So the next thing we want to do is think about how we want to use this app. So in here we have this nice scrollable field. Maybe when I select this content here, I would like it to, if I tap on it, enlarge the media. I want to see more of the content that's potentially there, if it's like a news article or something, or whatever's going on, a friend's post. I want to be able to click on it and get an enlarged view here. So if I'm saying I want to be able to tap and see this, we want to select these components first. So I'll come in, and this is nicely labeled as feed item 1. So I have a couple of options here. I can select this entire group, and you see that blue bounding box around it. What will happen here is if I create this as an event, even that white space up top will be clickable as our content, which we might not want. So what I'm going to do instead is select these 2 items within it, which gives us a box around our circle and a box around our content. And you can see that we have still just this one little lightning bolt, even though we have two things selected. So rather than having to give them each an event, we can put one event on two items, even though we don't have them selected as the group. So if we have this selected, I'm going to click on our lightning bolt. We get our events panel, and what I'm going to do is take tap, and I'm going to drag it back onto the same artboard. So when we click on an event, whichever one we want, we get this nice arrow here. And what this does is, if we had a secondary artboard, I could say, oh, when I tap on this, I want it to go to this artboard. But we only have one. So I'm going to take it right back to where we are. It highlights our artboard in blue, and it duplicates it. If we see up top, we have two event arrows. And what these are the names of the content that we had selected that we're able to tap on. So we selected two things at once. We created two events from one artboard, which you can create as many events as you like from a single artboard, which is nice, rather than just being able to do one at a time. So now, if I zoom out and we have our first artboard highlighted, we won't really see anything happen, but then we see that that green box went to the second artboard because I clicked on the content in the first one. So if I select it again, I come over in my preview and we'll tap. We see that it's actually transitioned the content. We don't see any change because everything's in the same place, right? If we pull up our animate panel, there's the button up top to pull up our animate from the bottom. We can actually see our layers here that we have on each one. And down here is where we'll be able to see our animation timelines. So right now they both say frozen because all of our content stays in the same place. There's no movement scaling, there's no movement X or Y on the artboard. So since everything's in the same place, it by default has frozen these artboards for us. So I'm going to tuck that back away for now so we can get some more content here. So on this one, I really just wanted to zoom in to this top piece of content, right? So I don't need these other pieces. So what I'm going to do right now is come back into my items. I'm going to just delete these bottom three feed pieces because we're not going to be using them. Actually, look at that. No, let's not do that. So I'll leave these for now. What we'll do is we'll take these three. Instead of deleting them, let's actually just bump them off the bottom of the artboard. So I'm just going to select them, shift and down, and we'll put them out of sight, out of mind. So that we can come back in here. And now when I click on my content, you'll see that those layers animate to the bottom of the screen. Sorry, I was changing my mind mid-course. Is everybody still on board here? So yeah, we click in our preview, and now we can see them disappear off the bottom. And that's just default animation. So actually, if we have either of these events up top selected, and we click animate, we actually see we have a timeline now that goes by default to 0.3 seconds with our default animation. With these, we can click and drag either part. We can actually move the whole thing to delay the animation, and then we can change the easing on the animation to any of these defaults. And this thing is wholly editable too. Yeah, the linear is it's very boring. So these are all default iOS animations. So the default setting is iOS and OS 10, like the animation that Apple uses. These other ones are just general ones. So if you go to like easings.net, these are like the standard ones. But you can change any of these. For like springs, you can change the tension. But for now, we'll just leave this in default. So I'm going to zoom back out, hide the animate panel. So if we come back into our second artboard, what we want to do here is take our content and we'll make it the full size of the screen for now. You know, we want to be able to click and zoom into it. So I'm going to take this profile button. And I'm going to do the same thing I did with the other pieces of content, but with this one, I'm going to put it off the top of the screen. And again, with all this, you guys can really put things wherever your heart desires. As long as they're off the screen, they're going to animate. So if you want to play around, feel free. Next thing we're going to do is take our media content and our filler content and expand it to be the whole size of the screen. So I'm going to start with my media. I'm just going to click and drag it up to the top. And drag it over so it expands. Excellent. And then I'm going to come into my content filler group. And here, I'm going to do the same thing with this gray box. I'm going to take it all the way down to the bottom of the artboard. Just fill it in. So now I probably want more filler content just to fill up the screen. So what I'm going to do is select all of my filler content. I'm going to option, drag it down. And we'll do that one more time. I'll leave a little gap there. Cool. So now on our second screen, we have potentially what media would be, right? And then we have an expanded piece of content here. So the one thing we will want to do is come back into our filler. And what I've done is I've selected all the new filler content I've made. So if you guys created any extra filler content for this page, go ahead and grab that. I'm going to do a quick Command C just to copy it over. And then we'll switch our direction back to the first artboard with our content on our clipboard. So what we're trying to do here is we don't just want this content to appear out of nowhere. So right now, if we look in our preview window, I click up here, and then everything animates nicely, but then there's just all this extra content all of a sudden. So if we have selected that content, we can come to the first artboard. We can paste it here, and then we can choose which direction we want it to come in from by moving it off of our artboard. So I can put it down off the bottom. I can put it off either side. So depending on where we want our content to flow in from, when we go to that second screen, we move it like stage right, stage left, just hide it behind the curtain, let's say. So I'm going to put it down
Hey Brian,
to the bottom.
is there a paste in place option?
So there isn't. Yeah, you can kind of fake it, but there isn't a good way. Yeah. If you're in the same group, it'll do it automatically, but there's no way to kind of fix that if you're not working with the same assets.
What is paste in place?
They put it in the same spot on the same artboard, right? Yeah. So we've put that secondary content here. We've moved it off the bottom. So now when I click on my content here to expand it, we see that they animate very quickly up from the bottom. So that's, we have a lot of content hidden off the artboard right now, but it's just that when we transition, we see it come over.
Does the animation work based off the layer name?
Yeah,
Association?
yeah. So that's here we have two events. One is if you tap on the icon, one is if you tap on the media. And in the animate panel, you can see we have a ton of things being animated right now. They just will animate by default based on the event. So the same things are being animated on both one. The really cool thing about Principal is even though we have these two events, if we come into one of these events and change how the animation works, so let's do it for instance here. If I take all these fills I just put on here, I can take these, we can put them out to half a second, and then I can have them do this crazy spring motion. So I could select multiple animations at the same time. The nice thing is, in my other event, they've already changed the same animation. Since they're the same layer, it knows to do the same animation. So you don't have to do all your animation over for every layer. It knows, hey, if it's this object and it's going to this artboard, it gets this animation. So actually, now that I've put that spring animation on, we come over here, all of our content will delay and spring up into the view. All right. Is everybody following along? Any questions? Yeah. Okay. So we're of course cutting it close on time already. So there's a couple of things I'd wanted to do. We can either do like a tabbing menu bar, or we can put a menu bar up top, and there's some cool little micro interaction like a hamburger icon animated. I know people like that stuff a lot. Do you guys prefer to put a header in or a footer in? Header? All right. Adam says header. We're going to do a header. It's being decisive for the rest of us. All right. So is everybody calling up to where we are so far? If you haven't done the spring animation, don't worry about it. We didn't really get quite that far yet. So if we come to artboard 1, we have this nice news feed. We want to add a header to it. Come over here. So what we're going to do is, of course, have our artboard 1 selected. I'm going to hit rectangle, or you can hit R on your keyboard to put a rectangle in. What I'm going to do is drag it all the way across, and it'll snap in place. And I'm just going to change the vertical height to 50 to give it a little bit more depth here. And just change the color so we can see it. You guys can choose any color you want. You don't have to choose purple. And then I'm going to rename this layer to header background. All right. Next, let's put some text on it. We can name our app here. So I'm going to call mine Cool App. And we can choose any font we want. So I'm going to go with the old standby of Comic Sans. And I'll make this 24 point. And then what I'll do is I'm going to select this and select my background image. And I'll just hit the center align so it puts it in the vertical middle of the background. All right, so now we have our cool app, or whatever you want to name it. Now we need to make a hamburger icon. So I'm going to still stay in artboard 1. I'm going to hit R to make another rectangle. Change the width to 40, let's say, and we'll put a height of, we'll go to 5. So now we have our top bun of our hamburger icon. The easiest thing to do here is once you get this in, we'll name it as ham top. we can hit Command D and duplicate it, and then just shift in the down arrow, and it'll put your middle in. So we'll rename this layer ham mid, and then we'll do that again. Command D, shift in the down arrow, and we'll rename this one ham bot. So now we have a nice nice hamburger icon going on. Of course, what I'm going to do here, I bet you guys can't guess, is I'm going to select these 3 layers for our hamburger icon. First, I'm going to make them white so we can see them a little easier. And then I'm going to hit Command G and put them in a group. So the next thing I want to do is take all of our components from the header, the text, the header background, and the hamburger icon. I'm going to move them all the way to the front. So I just hit Command Shift and the right bracket to send to front. Put my hamburger icon back in front of that. Select all these layers, and we're going to group them. And we'll call this one header. So this is what Mike had asked a question about earlier about paste in place. So we have this header here. We probably want it on our second artboard too. So what we can do is once we have our header group, I can hit Command C. We can select our second artboard, hit Command V, and it puts it in the same spot. So since this group didn't have any parents to it, it pastes in place. So yeah, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. But if you're not within a group and the content doesn't exist, it probably will paste in place. Cool. So now we have our cool app. And we duplicated it over here so we know all the layer names are the same, which means that they'll animate state to state automatically. Right now, nothing would happen because everything's the same. So if we come into Artboard 2, I'm going to pull this up here. We'll zoom in a little bit. What I want to do is we're going to dig into this hamburger icon and make it do something fun. So what I've done is I've double clicked on it to have it selected here. Very tight in my layers. We're going to do everything individually. So when one layer goes to the next, we can decide if we want to do like a nice arrow. We'll do a back arrow, right, to get back to our previous page. So what we'll do is we'll take this and we'll change the angle of it. And we'll have this go 180 degrees. Hit enter. And for this one, let's say I just want the arrow without the stem on it. So I just want 2 components of the 3 that I had. So I'm going to take the opacity on this middle bar, put it all the way down to 0. So that means when it transitions, it'll flip 180 degrees. At the same time, it'll fade from 100% opacity to 0. So we have our bottom guy. So what we can do is say we want this to go 180, but we want it to be on a 45 degree angle. So we can do 180 plus 45. And that'll give us a nice 45 degree angle bar. So we're going to do the same thing for the top one. We'll do 180, but instead here we want it minus 45, so it's on the same 90 degree angle with the other one. And then from here, it's really just tinkering to get them together. So we can play to your heart's desire to change the width a little bit. I might take both of mine down to 25, just so it fits within the view. And then we can line them up. All right. So once we have them overlapped here, what'll be nice is we can come back to our main menu. We have this single clickable piece, and then we have our hamburger icon. Now the layers will rotate and go in motion. So it's, we didn't have to name anything. We just had to move components around to look like what we wanted them to look like. Now they're animating. So what I'm going to do here is, now that we have this hamburger icon group, on the second page, we need to be able to get back somehow. So I'm going to select that, select our event tab, say tap, and drag my arrow back to the first artboard, so that when you click on it, you come back to the first artboard. So now in my preview window, when I click on this, it comes back to our original home screen. So we can click on the content, loads in, click on the back arrow, disappears. Everybody keeping up? Questions?
Which one do you do first? Which one do you animate first? Or sorry, the lightning bolt thing.
Where are you at? Let's see.
I haven't done the tap yet.
Okay. Yeah, so if you select the group that's in, do you have these three components together? Yeah. So yeah, you have the group, and that way, any if you press on any of them, it'll take you back. So select the lightning bolt. I just did a tap, because that way you can just click on it. Yeah. Yep. Looks good. So now in your preview, you'll be able to go back. Oh. Sorry, Sean. So the question was about which component to select for the event. Because we have those three rectangle white bars making our hamburger icon, and we could select all of those potentially, but why not just select the group in that instance? Because even if they click in between the bars, we still want that touch, since it's a big finger on a small app, to be able to go back. So we put the event on the group. So that's pretty cool. I know we're running short on time, but just to clean this up a little bit while you guys are here, what we'll want to do is come back in here. We had this group, is showing a little bit too high now. So what we can do is take our scrolling group and bring them down. We just want it to start at a different spot. So if, this is probably the highest we want it to go, so we can bump the whole group down. And that way, it starts below it. So we just take the whole group and manually move it down. Same on our second artboard. We have this media header. For our sake, it doesn't really matter that it's cut off, but we can still drag it down. So now we have this nice, that spring animation is pretty funny. Cool. So yeah, if you have an event selected, like I do up here, see this one profile tap is chosen. We can choose any event, and this is how you'd move around between them. So for like going back from our hamburger icon, these are all the things we can animate here. So you can see we have a million things. It makes it a little easier if you put things into groups, but you can still animate the individual items even if they're in a group. So any component that moves anywhere off an artboard that was previously on another one is going to have this default animation, and you can always change that. But again, most of the time, you just want the special things, your main direction of what's happening, and maybe a secondary action, to show like, here's how you would use this page, or some sort of functionality. So for our sake, I'm gonna just clean up that spring action on that text real quick. It's a little strong. So we could still have it spring in if we wanted to, but I'm going to take the tension and put it down to maybe 150, and I'll put this to 20. So that it's just a little more subtle, hopefully. It's still going to be crazy because spring actions are just by default, I think, crazy. So we can test it out here. So if I click on my content, so it's a little better in that instance. It is starting up top and then coming up, but yeah, it's a little nicer. So it's just playing around with all those drags. Cool. I think we're running out of time. Does anybody have any burning questions for me? Cool. Yeah.
Oh, is it working? Oh my God. So if I want to get this like on my phone, how would I go about doing that?
Good question, Sean. We'll do that next week too. But what you can do is you can plug your phone in via USB to your computer while you have Principal open. And if I zoom in on it, up in the top corner here, we have a mirror option. So if your phone is plugged into your computer and you have an iPhone, you have to have an iPhone, or an iPad, an iDevice, let's say, you can hit mirror and it'll go. Alternatively, you can send it to yourself in an email or open a Dropbox file. And if you have Principal Mirror on your phone, it'll work. So it's really cool. It's a good way to send things out. The one thing, be careful about Google Drive. It tends to corrupt PRD files. Don't know why. Not all the time, but sometimes you go to open it and it won't be able to open. Another really cool thing you can do is this whole presentation I've done today, you can see in the top left, it says Principal Viewer. And this by default comes with Principal. So all I did here was let's see if I can. I took my presentation, which is these artboards here. You file, export from, and that's a file you can send to anybody regardless of if they have Principal or not. So if you have a client that you know has a Mac or a coworker that you know has a Mac, you can send them this file and they'll be able to open it, touch it, play around with it, just like you would if you had Principal. So that's a really cool option.
Which button am I hitting? That's select. Yeah, the mute button. And then the other one. There you go. That one's it? Okay. Yep. For the preview, when you go to the second page and you try to scroll up, for you, does it show like past the top?
Like if I do this?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
is
you
that
can always-
something?
You can always poll. So this is a default animation of the scrolling feature, where it tries to do that nice snap that you'd get in any iOS app that you play with. So some have a loading, some just tell you like it's a nice thing saying, oh, nothing else, and you can see that there's nothing, and then it resets. That's just part of that. When we get into drivers next week, drivers allow you to manipulate how that functions and if that can happen, which is kind of nice. And of course here we can scroll past it, but this is only because we had that scrolling turned on when we duplicated our artboard.
Sure.
So if we wanted to clean that up, we could go into that group, turn scrolling off, and then you wouldn't be able to scroll. You'd only be able to see this content, which is probably what we wanted. Or potentially, you want more content at the bottom of your page so they keep in your app. So, but the top is just like, you really have to drag. If I'm doing a 2-finger drag, like you would on a computer, it doesn't happen. It just does it for touch because it knows that's a basic function of iOS.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ryan, I have a question. Can you mask on layers?
So you can clip sublayers, which is, there's a couple ways you can do it. If you have a group, we can take things in our group, and there's a clip sublayers option, which you see all that content that's hanging out below the artboard disappears. And we can parent things, which is probably more about what you're looking for. So you can take two components that aren't grouped. So let me make a new artboard real quick. So if we take this and I make two rectangles, I'm going to make this rectangle into a red circle, let's say. We can take this and parent it with this one, and then it's kind of a fake way to do a mask. So if you have them lined up correctly, you can clip them and change the alpha channel on the other one. Um, it's a lot of workarounds to get to what you would call a mask in something like Sketch.
Have they added blend modes yet?
No, they did add shadows, so it's getting closer. They're adding more features.
Love shadows.
Yeah, really, I think they added shadows so that if you're doing a dribble export, you can put like your artboard with a shadow and then a color, so you can export it to dribble. But
Can you do that the OS X export, or say for Mac?
mhm.
Does that embed fonts, or do
Yeah,
you
so
still
everything.
require?
That's a good question, Kevin. Everything in a printable file is embedded in the file, so these can get really large. And when you do export from Mac or just a PRD to send to somebody who has Printable Mirror on their phone, everything gets exported. So any audio, any video, all these high-res components, all this content gets exported in the file. So they can get pretty large, but that way you don't have to worry about the person having everything. So it's cool.
I think somebody might have asked something sort of similar to this before, but I can imagine when you get like a lot of artboards,
Mhm.
you get really big, changing like a fundamental detail of an element in one artboard would be pretty meticulous to replicate that in all the other artboards.
Yeah.
Is there a way of associating elements like details?
So there's
like
no
that?
like the symbols feature in Sketch is awesome because you can go in and change and duplicate that symbol over and over and over again, and it changes everything. One of the this week, the only real workaround for this, the answer is no. So the workaround for this is if you're importing from something like Sketch, as long as it's the same file with the same artboards and the same names, and you made one change, you can replicate it in a tool like Sketch really quick, and then you hit import, and it just resyncs. It doesn't re-import, it just resyncs all those files. So if you make one change, it'll know the layer names, it'll move everything appropriately. But if you're just designing like basic, like flat animations like we were doing today, there's no quick way around it. You can, group things more heavily and duplicate again and then delete everything pretty quickly, but there's no simple way to do it yet. Of course, there's an update like every week, so we'll see. We'll see when we come in next week what's changed. Yeah. That's that's not easy to do. You can just select, like I could select both the headers here, and then change the fill on both. But those are both grouped layers, so I have to get down to that header background layer in each one, select those, then change the fill. So really until you're working high fidelity, which honestly beyond simple interactions like saying, does this paging work well when I play with it on the phone? Or how does this menu bar come out? So that's the kinds of things I would do low fidelity like we were working in today. We kind of got a little bit further than you would typically work in a low fidelity environment. So once you have those high fidelity imports, even from Photoshop, as long as it's a file that's named the same and you re-import it, it'll adjust it for you. So it's not as bad as it seems because typically you wouldn't be working solely in Principle yet until I get that. So it's cool. Yay. All right. Ta-da.